Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the world of massive construction projects. We're going to find out why some of them soar to success while others crumble, not because of weak steel, but because of weak paperwork.
All right, to get our heads around this, let's start with a really big, high-stakes question. It's one that sits at the very foundation of every single major construction project out there. You know, we see these incredible structures shooting up all around us, gleaming skyscrapers, massive bridges, but what we don't really see are the countless projects that go completely off the rails, ones that end up disastrously over budget, years behind schedule, or tangled up in nasty legal battles. So, what's the hidden reason? To find an answer, one report took a deep dive into over 700 massive capital projects from all over the world. And their combined value? A mind-blowing $1.2 trillion. And buried in all that data, they found a really shocking and very, very expensive pattern. And here it is. It turns out the biggest risks aren't always things like faulty concrete or bad weather. Nope. More often than not, a project's failure is literally written into its DNA from the very beginning. Right here, in the legal documents. So this is the key thing to get. Before a single shovel ever hits the ground, every single project is first built on paper. And that paper foundation, that's the contract.
You should really think of the contract as the project's entire operating system. It defines who does what, when they do it, and crucially, what happens if they don't. A tiny little error or a vague phrase in this blueprint, it can cause catastrophic failures way down the line. And this shows it perfectly. A contract isn't just some document you sign and then shove in a drawer. It's a living, breathing process. It has these 5 distinct stages, from just the initial idea all the way to the final handover. And here's the kicker. Every single one of those stages is a potential landmine if it's not managed perfectly.
But look, even having a great blueprint isn't enough. On projects that can last for years and years, you also need something like a crystal ball, a way to see what could go wrong in the future. And this is exactly where proactive risk management comes into play. See, it's not about reacting to disasters as they're happening. It's a systematic process for finding, analyzing, and basically diffusing potential problems before they ever get a chance to blow up.
Now, this is really interesting. How do teams actually make sense of all those potential risks? Well, they often use a simple but super powerful tool, just like this matrix. By plotting out each risk based on how likely it is to happen and how bad the fallout would be, they can see, almost instantly, which threats need their full attention right now. And that matrix is actually just one part of a much larger formal process. It's a continuous cycle, you see. You identify the risks, you assess their potential damage, you analyze the data, you come up with a plan to mitigate them, and then, this is the important part, you evaluate how well your plan is working and you start the whole loop over again.
But let's be realistic. Even with the best contracts in the world and the most careful risk management, things can and often do go wrong.
So when an unexpected issue does pop up, let's say you start digging and find the soil conditions are completely different than what the survey said, you can't just ignore it. There has to be a formal process for dealing with it, and that's where we get into the world of claims and disputes.
And it is absolutely critical to understand the difference between these two things. A change order is basically a planned, mutual agreement. It's both sides saying, okay, let's officially change the plan. A claim, on the other hand, that's a formal dispute. That's one party saying, you didn't hold up your end of the deal, and it cost me time or money.
So what are people fighting about? Well, it almost always boils down to one of 3 things: money, changes, and time. Problems with getting paid, arguments over scope changes, and unexpected project delays, those are the big 3 that can grind a multi-billion-dollar project to a complete halt.
So, after seeing all the ways a project can completely derail, what's the big takeaway? How do you actually build for success from the get-go?
And this really brings us back to the core idea. The true foundation of a successful project isn't laid with concrete and steel. It's built with an ironclad contract and a smart, forward-thinking risk management plan. If you get the paper version right, the physical version actually has a fighting chance.
And getting it right on paper really just boils down to these core principles. The language in the contract has to be crystal clear, so there's no room for misinterpretation. The scope of what's being built has to be defined with surgical precision. Risks need to be managed as a continuous process, not a one-time checklist. And you have to agree on how you'll solve arguments before you even have any.
Which leaves us with one final, kind of provocative question. If we have the blueprint, if we know the best practices, then why do so many of these massive, complex projects still end in failure? It makes you wonder. Perhaps knowing the right way to build is one thing, but actually executing it perfectly under immense pressure, well, that's the real challenge.